Hello, my friends. It is me, Countess, and I'm back with another video for you guys. And as always, I hope it finds you well wherever you are out there in the great wide world. It's been a minute since I sat down and recorded a video. Sorry about that. Just things got kind of busy in my life the last month and just haven't had time to get my act together with making the videos. But I'm back today because I wanted to sit down and share another interesting article with you guys about another highly interesting character in the music industry who was on the scene in the 60s, but mostly came in to his star, I guess, in the 1970s. That is Mr. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, basically the founder of Led Zeppelin. And I found this article by William Ramsey, who's really good at, all of his research and whatnot. So I thought that we could just kind of buzz through this like we've done in the past with other figures and kind of look at Mr. Page's involvement with the occult and what Crowley's influence was on him and sort of, his influence on music and pop culture, and how, again, that influence from way back then has sort of like bled into the culture of today, and can feel it. It's just like with when I went over the Bowie information, Kenneth Anger, all these people were like talking about the ideas of Thelema and personal liberation and freedom. And, Jimmy was definitely one of those propagators. So let's check this article out, shall we? So it starts with a quote by Mr. Page, and he says, "I was living it. That's all there is to it. It was my life, that fusion of music and magic," with a K. Born in southern London in 1944, James Patrick Page's obsession with the guitar began at age 13. Versed at an early age in blues and rock while in his teens in the early 60s, Page became an in-demand session player. Another highly trained session musician turned rock star. Kind of a theme, don't you think? It's estimated that his guitar performances can be heard on 60% of the records recorded in Britain during that era. Wow. In 1965, bored with session work, Page joined the Yardbirds, eventually replacing Jeff Beck on lead guitar. After the Yardbirds fizzled out, in 1968, Page decided to start his own band. He enlisted another talented session player, John Paul Jones, and two friends, Robert Plant and John Bonham, to his yet unnamed group. Page decided to name the band Led Zeppelin, liking the heavy and light connotations, blending of opposites. This was Page's band, and part of the reason things ran smoothly is that I had the last decision on everything. I was the producer, so there weren't going to be any fights, he remembered. Page produced the band's first album and sold it to the highest bidding record label. Two more commercially successful albums followed in the next 2 years, earning millions of fans and garnering the band millions of dollars, making Led Zeppelin one of the highest-selling bands in music history. Page's interest in the occult is serious and long-standing. I read Magic in Theory and Practice, when I was about 11. Of course, 11, right? The number of magic. But it wasn't for some years till I understood what it was saying. His obsession began later, saying my interest in the occult started when I was about 15. Page read from a variety of occult sources, including Aleister Crowley. I read a lot of Crowley and I was fascinated by his ideas. But I was reading across the board. It wasn't unusual at the time to be interested in comparative religions and magic. He said it wasn't until his 20s that he began the actual practice of magic, reading about different things that people were supposed to have experienced and seeing whether you could do it yourself. He told Circus Magazine, I read Crowley's technical works. I read those a number of years back and still refer to them from time to time, just because of his system. The more I was able to obtain of his own, as opposed to what other people wrote about him, I realized he had a lot to say. He believed he obtained the results that impacted Led Zeppelin. I found that Crowley's system worked. Plus, all the aspects of ritual magic, talismanic magic, I could see that it worked. His thing was total liberation and really getting down to what you played. What you wanted to do, do it. He was a visionary and he didn't break them in gently. Page shared many of Crowley's opinions. Magic is very important if people can go through it. I think Aleister Crowley is completely relevant today. He still is today. We are still seeking for truth. The search goes on. Crowley didn't have a very high opinion of women, and I don't think he was wrong. Although I don't agree with everything he said, he was a visionary. I don't particularly want to go into it because it's a personal thing and it isn't in relation to anything I do as a musician apart from what I have employed from his system in my own day-to-day life. Because his whole thing was the liberation of the person, of the entity, and how that restriction would foul you up, lead to frustration, which leads to violence, crimes, mental breakdown, depending on what type of makeup you have on underneath, like your genetic makeup. The further this age we're in gets into technology and alienation, a lot of the points he's made seem to manifest themselves all down the line. And there's a quote. If it hadn't been for the Beatles, there wouldn't be anyone like us around. There you go. The influence, obviously. Beatles introducing Crowley and Crowley's ideas to the world, paved the road for others to do the same thing. Yeah. So then it goes on. Page believed Crowley was a misunderstood genius of the 20th century. I'm not trying to interest anyone in Aleister Crowley any more than I am in Charles Dickens. All it was that at a particular time he was expounding a theory of self-liberation, which is something that is so important. He was like an eye into the world, into the forthcoming situation. My studies have been quite intensive, but I don't particularly want to go into that, like you said earlier, because it's a personal thing. The thing is to come to terms with one's free will, discover one's place and what one is, and from that you can go ahead and do it and not spend your whole life suppressed and frustrated. So it's like, just let it go, like literally when people say, like, do your own thing, you be you, just let it all hang out. That's what that means. You have to take the good with the bad, and integrate those parts of yourself to, be free. So Led Zeppelin's tours were notorious for their brutality and excess, kind of like a going back to the Dionysian cult kind of vibe. That's what I think of as the brutality and the excess, the Bacchus celebrations and the women tearing up, the men, anybody that they could get their little greedy, hungry hands on, they did. So that's just what that makes me think of. But it's reversed because it's them as men. Anyways, so there were tales of pacts with the devil, and they followed Zeppelin throughout their career. And stories of orgies, black masses, and satanic rites were commonplace, mostly centered around the infamous Chateau Marmont off the Sunset Strip. It's a beautiful hotel. Beautiful, beautiful. Page developed a serious heroin addiction, losing weight and affecting his musicianship. Said Page of his substance abuse: I can't speak for the other members of the band, but for me, drugs were an integral part of the whole thing, right from beginning right to the end. Notorious groupie Pamela DeBarst stated, I believe that Jimmy was very much into black magic and probably did a lot of rituals, candles, bat blood, the whole thing. I believe he did that stuff. She has a crazy autobiography just off the cuff. I got her biography on Audible a couple years ago, and she reads it, and it is just, she led a fascinating life as a groupie. Anyways, just as an aside, I recommend it. Look it up. Look up. I think it's called like I'm with the band or something like that. I don't know. Highly recommend it though. It's a good listen. It's a good read. So, she goes on. She remembered that he would carry Crowley's artifacts around with him. He'd pull out one of Crowley's robes, Crowley's tarot deck, all the Crowley gear that he's collected. Of course, she says, the rumor that I have heard forever is that they all made a pact with the devil, Satan, the black powers, whatever, so that Zeppelin would be a huge success. And the only one who didn't do it was John Paul Jones. Which sounds interesting to me because John Paul Jones is still alive and kicking, It's kind of interesting. But she says that he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't sign a pact. So who knows where the rumor came from, but that was the rumor. Lori Maddox, Jimmy Page's underage paramour, remembered, Jimmy said it was all about the will. I will have this. And that's what Crowley believed. He said it was the white light he liked. And when you want something, you will it. So that was Jimmy's philosophy. I will have success. I will have everything I want. Eventually, Page's interests in Crowley became obsessive, and he sought out and purchased any of Crowley's books and artifacts that he could find. Bookseller and author Timothy DeArch Smith helped Page with his acquisitions. Page was sent to Smith by Gerald York, the ardent disciple of Crowley. Smith recollected that it didn't take long to realize how serious he was. For a handsome sum, Page bought a Crowley diary from Crowley's protege, Tim Dryburgh. Interesting. So it goes on where this Page's tour manager, Richard Cold, is recalling an occasion where he would mention the name Aleister Crowley to him. Crowley had been a real mystery to people, and I had occasionally become Jimmy's unofficial chauffeur on some of his Crowley shopping sprees. So several times he would call me and say, "Hey Richard, I'm in the mood to go shopping for some Crowley artifacts." Let's go. We'd drive from auction houses to rare book showrooms where Jimmy would buy Crowley manuscripts or other belongings, hats, paintings, clothes, etc. "What is it about this chap that fascinates you?" I asked Jimmy on one of our outings. "The guy was really quite remarkable," Jimmy said. "Someday we'll talk about it, Richard." But we never did. If the public felt there was a certain mystery surrounding Led Zeppelin, they weren't alone. As close as I was to them, I sometimes felt there was something within Jimmy that he never let anyone see, particularly when it came to Page's preoccupation with Crowley, seances, and black magic. I had a lot of unanswered questions. Music journalist Chris Welch said of Page, "I remember Jimmy showing me a book by Crowley. It wasn't as if it was some great crime. There were a lot of people getting into black magic, so it didn't seem unusual." I think Dennis Wheatley was much to blame for that as anyone. The Devil Rides Out. I love the movie The Devil Rides Out. I'm a big Christopher Lee fan, because I love horror. But Christopher Lee has always been it for me as far as the horror genre goes. So, and he was great friends with Dennis Wheatley as well. So it's just interesting how all these people are just connected with each other. So Page associated with Rolling Stones member Brian Jones and then girlfriend Anita Pallenberg. Miss Pallenberg then went to Keith Richards and they became junkies together. And yeah, that was just sharing the wealth, I guess, right? So they were interested in drugs and magic, and so they experimented with the Ouija board, and together they searched for rare occult books in London. Page adopted Jones's approach to music and the occult. Very interesting, so I did a tarot reading on Brian Jones over a year ago, and it totally signaled foul play and the drowning and all of that. But it's very interesting to hear like Jimmy Page talk about, or this article talk about Brian Jones's interest in the occult, because that doesn't get talked about a lot. He was supposedly a sacrifice, for the Stones to get big. And his death was definitely sus, as they say. So it's just interesting to me. All of these people are just fascinating. So Page had an interest in purchasing property associated with Aleister Crowley. He traveled to Sicily with the intent to purchase Crowley's Abbey of Thelema in Cefalù, but was not successful. However, in 1970, Jimmy Page bought Aleister Crowley's Boleskine House on Loch Ness in northern Scotland. Filmmaker Kenneth Anger had rented the house earlier in the year, and when Page heard it was on the market, he bought it. The previous owners were rumored to have used the building for black magic rituals. Fullerton, the old owner of Boleskine, went insane and killed himself. Page enlisted an old friend, Malcolm Dent, to watch over Boleskine. When he arrived, Dent found a magic circle, a pentagram, and an altar in the dining room, which Crowley used as his temple. Dent experienced the most terrifying night of his life at Boleskine. He awakened to hear the sounds of an animal snorting and snuffling and banging outside his door. He sat in bed with a knife and couldn't move even after the noise subsided. I sat on the bed for hours, and even when daylight came, it took lots of courage to open the door. Whatever was there was pure evil, Dent said. Another acquaintance claimed she was woken and attacked in the middle of the night by some kind of evil devil. Dent believed Boleskine was haunted. Duh. Yes. He believed it was haunted. Chairs would frequently move, doors opened and closed, carpets and rugs rolled up on their own. We loved living there despite the peculiar happenings. Besides the peculiar happenings, not like the freaky, traumatic, horrible happenings, just peculiar. That's very interesting choice of words there. Yeah. So Page hired the artist Charles Pace to paint the walls of Boleskine in the manner Crowley did at the Abbey of Thelema. About Boleskine House, Page recalled, "My house used to belong to Aleister Crowley. I knew that when I moved in, the house was built on the site of a kirk dating back from around the 10th century that had been burned down with all of its congregation. Nobody wanted it. It was in such a state of decay. I hadn't originally intended to buy it, but it was so fascinating." That's very interesting. About Boleskine, Page added, "The whole house has been filled with tales of people being taken to asylums because of drunkenness, suicides, you name it, and it's there, you know?" In 1972, Jimmy Page bought the Gothic Tower House from actor Richard Harris, outbidding David Bowie. And so it completed in 1881. The building was designed by Freemasonic architect William Burgess upon magical and alchemical principles. The entrance hall is decorated with astrological signs, mythological creatures, and allegories of arts and sciences. The house features a massive bookcase. Each room had a mystical theme, such as time, fame, etc. Fame makes a man take things over. In the library, Burgess painted himself holding a large compass. I wonder if it was pointing west. Page remarked about the design of the Tower House. "What a wonderful world to discover. I was still finding things 20 years after being there. A little beetle on the wall or something like that." Bebe Buell, girlfriend of Jimmy Page and mother of actress Liv Tyler, described the Tower House as having a satanic Edwardian quality. Maybe it was the medieval Sir Lancelot vibe. I don't know or care. Buell traveled to the Tower House to visit Page. "I got in a cab and I went to the Tower House, and I fell asleep there and didn't wake up till the next morning. I think Kenneth Anger may have been in the basement because I kept hearing all these crazy noises, and I felt like I was in a horror movie. Jimmy would say, 'Don't go in there.' No, don't go in there." Bebe Buell remembered Page as far more menacing than the multitude of other rock legends she met. "I think it was because they were genuinely afraid that he was Satan and that he had some sort of evil allure." Page bought an occult bookshop in London that had the same name as Crowley's occult encyclopedia, the Equinox Bookstore, at 4 Holland Street in Kensington. There was not one good bookshop in London with a good collection of occult books, and I was so pissed off at not being able to get the books I wanted. The store featured all types of occult literature, including a few first editions of Crowley's works. The Equinox published 2 books, Aleister Crowley's version of the Goetia, covered in camel hair, and a Cosmic Science, an astrology book by Isabel Hickey. The Equinox closed in 1978. And released in 1970, the album Led Zeppelin III came wrapped in an expensive spinning wheel cover modeled on an old crop rotation chart. Interesting. Etched onto the inner vinyl groove of the record were 2 quotations. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And so mote it be." Page said, "You could say that the inscription was a little milestone on the way, a point of reference. I sort of wondered how long it was going to take before anyone noticed. I mean, it's just like what the Beatles did in Sgt. Pepper. You know, they didn't do an inscription, but they did that little Never to see any other way, never to see any, we'll all be magic supermen. That little, in the little outside groove of the record. And yeah, just kind of like getting the ball rolling with the PID clues, they had to kind of hint at that being on the record because a lot of people did not discover that little hidden gem there. So it took a long while for people to notice. No wonder they started playing our records backwards after that. Singer Robert Plant said Led Zeppelin's most famous track, Stairway to Heaven, has a mysterious background. Pagey had written the chords and played them for me. I was holding the paper and pencil, and for some reason I was in a very bad mood. Then all of a sudden my hand was writing out words. Edit. I sat there and looked at the words, and then I almost leaped out of my seat. In the summer of 1973, Led Zeppelin shot a concert film called The Song Remains the Same, featuring song clips from 3 performances at Madison Square Garden, as well as a fantasy sequences that featured each band member individually. For his fantasy section, Page was filmed at one of his estates, an approaching shot capturing Page, eye glowing bright red. His eyes were glowing bright red. It's kind of freaky. All my sections are related to the eyes being the mirror of the soul. Whoa. Another sequence takes place at Boleskine in ice-cold December, at night under a full moon, as requested by Page. He wanted to film on a steep rock surface where he would meet a hooded figure who ages a century or more before the camera's eye. The director and his crew shook their heads as if to say, another spoiled rock star with another crazy idea. Nevertheless, they erected some scaffolding on the side of the mountain. The mountain climbed by Page is Mille Fuervoni, and I totally butchered that, sorry, located near Boleskine Manor, the same peak Aleister Crowley used to climb. He ascends a rocky cliff upwards towards a hooded hermit, referencing the tarot card as well as the album cover for Led Zeppelin 4. Who is revealed to be an aged Page who gets younger and younger. So yeah, this article goes on and on, but I'm going to stop there because that's plenty of information, kind of interesting, well, he was just very well educated in Crowleyanity, and he was a propagator of Thelema, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Again, another individual who is highly, influential. And I find it interesting, like going back to the whole idea that they were like heathens, when they were on tour, they had their own party plane, where all the groupies would come on and they do drugs and have sex and just get crazy, and it just makes me think of the Dionysian cults of ancient Greece, hero worship. These guys were gods to women in the 1970s, just like the Beatles were gods to women and men, men wanted to be these guys, so all the chicks would dig them, just as much. So anyways, that is Mr. Jimmy Page, and just a little taste of his sort of dabblings in the world of Aleister Crowley, and just sort of the influence that Crowley that Crowley had over him and many people, as we have discovered, from David Bowie exercising his swimming pool, to Jimmy Page climbing up a, rock mountain as the hermit from the tarot deck, the 9th card of the tarot deck. It's just I find it all interesting. And also they each band member has their own sigil. I'll include a picture of that right here. And the sigils are all obviously kind of goes back to the Goetia and all of that with like King Solomon. And these sigils command power over certain demonic spirits. And that is why they were put on these albums. That is why they were made, concocted or sanctified or whatever. They want to like kind of brush it off and just say, oh, it's just artistic and, it's just something kind of cool looking for our band. But really, it's kind of like the stamp of magic, the magical happenings. They're willing all of this to go out into the world so that they can reap the benefits of manifesting their will. So anyways, guys, that's all I got for this one. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was nice to sit down and record another one. Let me know what you guys think about Mr. Page in the comments below. Let me know if you want to hear more videos kind of like this about exploring different people in the counterculture. Yes, I love the Beatles and I love Billy and the whole McCartney conspiracy and all that, but I'm also fascinated with all of these other people who were on the scene because they were all influenced from Beatles, like a pyramid scheme, right? Beatles at the top and then everybody else just kind of trickles down. And it comes down to us, the profane, and getting fooled and tricked by all of their magical workings. And it's just something, again, to be educated on. And it's important, to realize this stuff is being listened to today as well as influential music. So still working its magic to this very day. Anyways, guys, I hope you all have a wonderful day, wonderful night, whatever time it is that you're watching this video. And I, my friends, will see you in my next video. So until then, please take care of yourselves. Bye, guys.